Hi folks, Johnny Walsh from Living Wilderness Bushcraft School here. Today we're going to be making a hat on the hat loom we made in the last video. So this is the hat loom we made, and if you didn't see the video on this one, if you check on, there'll be a link in the description box, and somewhere over in this general area there'll be another link as well to the making of the hat loom. In this video we're going to concentrate on actually producing the hat. So we have our loom, I have 2 balls of wool, I have my hook, and the one thing I didn't show you last week is this. This is just a big pen that I've taken the ink cartridge out of, and I have sanded down the top a little here just to make it a little thinner. We're going to use this as our guide for wrapping the wool around the pegs. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. To start, pass your 2 strands of wool through the big pen. Once they're through the big pen, anchor off your wool on the peg in the side of the loom. Take up any slack and begin wrapping around the pegs in an anti-clockwise motion. Wrap each peg individually in the same way. This is the stitch we're going to be using the whole way through the project. You don't want this to be too tight or too loose. Once it's placed around without slipping off, that's tight enough. For people who are used to tying knots, this might take a little bit of practice. We don't want this too tight. If it's too tight, it'll be too difficult to take the stitch off the top of the peg when casting off in the next round. This is the same stitch we're going to be using the whole way through the project. It doesn't change at any point. You can hold the loom horizontally or vertically. Personally, I prefer holding it vertically like this. I find it more comfortable for wrapping. As we're going to need 2 rows of stitches, we continue around for a second loop at the beginning because you need to cast 1 stitch over the other. Here you'll see I'm using my bottom finger to help the wool go into position as I'm passing it around the pegs. I'm going to continue with this second round the full way around the loom again, so I have 2 full circles of loops around each one of the pegs. Once I get back to the beginning and I have 2 full lines the whole way around the loom, I anchor off as I did before, and then we start casting off. You insert the hook under the bottom loop, pass it over the top loop and over the peg, over the top of the peg. This is our casting off stitch. I find it easiest to come from in between the 2 and cast it over the top. But you can come from underneath like this if you wish. I just find sometimes it gets stuck and you take the 2 loops with you. You continue casting off in this method the whole way around the loom until you're back down to 1 wrap the full way around. You undo your anchor and you cinch down all the stitches we have on the loom to give yourself space for another round of wraps. And then you start wrapping again with your E-wrap stitch just as we did before. We have 2 rows here, the same as we did before. We continue wrapping so that we can cast the bottom one over the top. This is the basis of the entire knitting project. You make a row and then you cast it off over the top. The brim is made by folding over the knitting to make a double thickness at the bottom to give you a nice comfy band around your forehead. Starting at the beginning beside the anchor peg, take the first stitch you did and place it back over the peg. Do this the whole way around, placing the bottom stitch, which was our very first row of knitting, back over the peg. When you're doing this, make sure just to take the 2 strands of the initial round of knitting. Again, do this the full way around until you've got the entire brim made, and you'll end up with 2 rows again which you need to cast off the same way as we have been doing the whole way along. Cast these stitches off and then you're ready to continue the way you were before. Wrapping and casting off, wrapping and casting off, wrapping and casting off. From here, it's just building up the desired number of rows to give your hat the depth that you want. To measure your hat, so that you know you have the right depth, you take a measurement from the crown of your head to your eyebrows, or as low as you want the hat to go. Remember that when we reduce the crown at the top, you're going to have another inch, inch and a half on this. Subtract this from your final measurement. In order to reduce the crown, you can see here I've written numbers 1 to 6 the whole way along. We're going to start at peg 6 and take the 6th stitch and move it back onto the 5th peg. So we take our hook, we lift the 6th stitch off its peg and we place it onto the 5th peg. We do this the whole way around. This is the first step in reducing the crown to give a nice dome shape so it will fit our heads, reducing the bulk of the amount of wool at the top of the hat. Once you've each of these cast off, we need to go back and again, because we've 2 stitches on that peg, cast the bottom stitch over the top one the whole way around, bringing us back to just 1 stitch on each peg numbered 1 to 5. We then go back to wrapping, but we only wrap the pegs that has a stitch on it, skipping the 6th peg each time. This is where the numbers come in handy so that you can see what you're doing. Once you've reached the beginning again and each one of these pegs are wrapped, anchor off your thread and cast off in the same way that you have been doing all along, taking the bottom loop and casting it over the top. When we've cast off all the stitches, we go back and reduce further. We start at the 4th peg, we move it onto the 3rd peg, and this time around I'm showing you a different technique where once you cast off the 4th onto the 3rd, you can then do the 2nd stitch. You don't have to do them all in one round. It doesn't make any odds, it's just whichever way you fancy doing it. Do this the whole way around, so we're now missing pegs 6 and pegs 4. Wrap as you did before, skipping the pegs that don't have a stitch on it and continuing the whole way around the loom. Once you've got the stitches the whole way around, cast off as you did before. Now for our 3rd and final reduction, we move the stitch on peg 2 onto peg 1. As we did before, cast off, so we only have 1 stitch on that peg, and then continue around the loom, taking off number 2 and putting it onto number 1 all the way around. Once you've done this, wrap each one of the pegs with a stitch on it already, and then cast them off. Once you've cast off the whole way around, we now need to gather in all the wool at the top, and we're going to use a drawstring configuration for this. So wrap your wool around the loom 1.5 times and cut it off. We then take this wool and we need to thread it through each one of the stitches that are on them. So lay your wool down on top of the pegs, take your hook, lift underneath the peg and draw the wool through the stitch that's on each one of the pegs. Do this the full way around, and then you can remove your hat from the loom just by simply sliding any stitches that are on off the pegs, releasing your hat from the loom. Now your hat is free from the loom. We need to gather in the top like a drawstring on a bag. Hold your hat and gather in the top by pulling on the string. Once you've drawn in the string, put your fist inside the hat and with the flat of your palm, flatten out the top. Then take a loop and pass it through on the outside of the centre, creating a loop on the inside of the hat. Pass the working end of your thread through the centre hole of the hat and then tie off using whatever knot you desire. Pull it tight and then tidy up any loose ends, trimming any of the threads that need to be trimmed. Once you've done this, stretch your hat out, help it take its shape, and you've got yourself a finished hat. And there we have it, finished hat. What do you reckon? I know I'm going to be warm. Okay folks, I hope you enjoyed that project. Now as you see, it's a nice simple little thing that anybody can do. It doesn't take too long. And I hope it's another bit of kit you go out and try and make for yourself. Good in days like this when you go out and about.